How do I say this? Starfield Shattered Space DLC is... Why is no one even addressing that this exists?
Because it barely does, Scott Tilford. And that pains me to say. I did not expect to be sat in the studio on this fine Thursday morning telling you how disappointed I
He messaged me last night, can we talk about how bad this is? That's a pen, that.
No
one knew... This is a text pen.
Pigeon carrier. Sent it off and it went to Tilford Manor and dropped the bad news off.
Yes, we can talk about this.
No, if you guys watched the news that we did the other day talking about Starfield's 1 year anniversary, my first impressions with Shattered Space, you're probably as surprised as I am to find out that I really didn't like it. And that's because...
It started well.
That's exactly right. I do stand by my first impressions in that piece because the game does make a great first impression. The DLC immediately sets up all of these tantalizing mysteries. You're going to a new location which looks visually really stunning. You're in a cool city and you're getting a lot of emergent side missions that are popping off that have actual choices for you to make in them, and not just one choice, 2, 3, maybe even 4 outcomes depending on what you do. So I thought after the first couple of hours, I'm in for something good. I'm in for a Far Harbor style experience or a Point Lookout style experience, but unfortunately now I have finished the main campaign. I have not finished every side mission 100%, but I feel like I don't want to, judging by what I've seen, because Scott, after that first few hour period, the promise of what was offered in Shattered Space completely falls off a cliff, and I kind of don't even know where to start. I think maybe with the price point, because they are selling this for $30. I don't think it's worth $30 at all. I think
that noise was oh god, okay.
I think a $30 price point comes with a certain level of expectation that you're going to get pretty substantial expansion. Maybe not. I mean, it's slightly less than what we paid for Shadow of the Erdtree earlier this year and Phantom Liberty last year. 2 great expansions. And this, considering that price is kind of half of the overall Starfield package, this is not half a Starfield. This is barely even a third of a Starfield, if not a quarter, if not even less, because the main campaign is literally about 5 hours-ish long, and more importantly, I don't think those 5 hours are particularly engaging, and I'll get to the actual mission design soon, but I kind of want to put it out there that you're paying $30 for a relatively small experience that you might even finish and not even realize you've got to the end of it,
Let's touch on some specifics. We are going to do full spoilers, but Josh was telling me before recording that there's not even that much that you can spoil anyway. But we'll get to them in a little bit more. But yeah, you wanted to talk about some of the loot components, the reasons to go off the beaten path, the reasons to explore, and the mission design itself. Does it feel like, I guess, that's just incredibly rote at this point?
Just incredibly bare bones. Starfield only released 1 year ago. It feels like a quick turnaround for what they're dubbing a big expansion, and it does feel unfinished. It does feel, and I don't know this for certain, that what they set out to make isn't what they've necessarily delivered, because like I said, those first impressions promise so much that I don't think is delivered in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, I guess I can run through what's actually new. So you get a new main quest with House for Run, which is teased in the main game. Like I said, that is quite short, and unlike the main game, it's essentially just one planet that you're exploring, but there are way more points of interest and bespoke side missions tied to it. It feels like a classic Bethesda exploration loop in that sense, where you're not jumping from planet to planet, you're just getting one biome and you're exploring it. The issue is there's not much to find in that biome, even though it isn't improvement on the planets that you've been to before. Maybe my biggest disappointment was the lack of new enemies or loot. There are a few new enemies, but they're barely tweaks on stuff that we've already fought millions of times before in the base game, and they're annoying. One new enemy is essentially just like a space, like the space pirates and the raiders that you fight in the base game, but they can teleport around the level, which could be a cool concept, but it's just really frustrating because it makes fights, it drags them on for ages, and it's not difficult because you can kind of wipe these guys out quickly, but essentially you're shooting someone here and then they'll teleport like 100 meters behind you, then you have to run to them, you might get one more shot, then they'll teleport back the other way, and you're kind of in this weird slapstick skit where...
Just running after the fun. Is the fun over here? No, it's over there.
Running after these teleporting enemies that aren't that fun to fight, thinking, wow, I could have done this in 2 minutes, but It's the loot that kind of pains me, because the base game, I thought, was pretty good at doling out new ship parts or new weapons or new armor to collect. And I thought, at the very least, what I would get from Shattered Space is a sort of power bump, some cool-looking armor that's better than what I already have, some interesting new weapons, and what have you. But in the game itself, there are new weapons, which are fun enough, but they're not $30 worth. There's only a couple of them, and they didn't outclass the guns I was already using, so I was kind of using these new guns just because they were new.
Do you think the thing is, I mean, it's not that Bethesda's reputation doesn't justify this train of thought that I'm about to go into here, but they had a lot of features and parts of the game that should have been there at launch. Like the vehicle, you can argue. The maps, definitely, they felt so non-existent in the base game. They had this update planned. I think they announced Shattered Space almost straight after the game came out. And so that idea of we're going to have these quality of life upgrades as well, we might as well roll that together and do the look how much we're doing for you overall thing, which is kind of like the No Man's Sky approach if we're going to do a genre comparison. I just wonder if this was only like a standard patch update, or like finishing off a planet that would have been in the game anyway that you might have just been able to land on. I mean, there's a ton of random planets and ships you can land on, etc. That this could have just been slotted into the by the sounds
100%
could have just been slotted in. And I just wonder whether somewhere along the development pipeline they were like, cut it off here, ship this. We still need to do all this stuff, and then we'll just put it out there and stick a price tag on it.
If this was a $15 DLC, or if it was even like just a free additional content to celebrate the 1 year anniversary with the rest of the features that you mentioned there, I wouldn't have as big a problem as I'm having with it. But it is being billed as like a major expansion. It does cost $30. There are comparisons being made to the other major expansions that Bethesda have done in the past, and it's just there isn't enough there to warrant those comparisons, I don't think. And I worry that it sets a bad precedent, because Bethesda's already said that they want essentially yearly expansions for the game, and if they're all going to be priced like this, and if they're all going to be of this quality, I can't see them supporting it for that long. I'd rather have waited an extra year and gotten a more substantial thing, because, like you said, this does feel like it could have been in the base game. But worse than that, the experience itself is worse than the cities in the base game. You know, like I said, you arrive to this, mysterious place that barely anyone's ever been to. You're meeting an entire faction for the first time. It's got so much build-up. It's got so much history that you've been clued in on in the main game. And you get there, and granted, half the city has been destroyed by the events of the game, the cataclysm of the game that you're trying to solve.
Okay.
But even then, like, the interiors that you're going into, the side quests that you're picking up, it doesn't feel anywhere near as substantial as the hubs in the base game, and some of the cities it could go to and how much was going on there. Considering that half of this population has been wiped out and they're in utter turmoil, everyone's just kind of just walking around as normal. And there's it's such
a Bethesda selling. Hey,
literally,
hey, what's up?
It's like, okay, do you want to do a fetch quest for me? My entire friends and family and bloodline just died, but I mean, I need to go find this grot over in the hills. It frustrates me just because of how much potential was there. Like, this didn't have to be as big of a city by design as the others that are in the game, but it feels like it would have been. It feels like everything interesting that's happened to this place happened before you arrived, with the cataclysm, with everything going down, and you're arriving after the fact and kind of just picking up loose ends where you could have been arriving and it could have been in constant turmoil. You could have been, engaging with these power dynamics and different factions that are splintering off and deciding the sort of fate of the overall house. And the game kind of hints at that, but it just never delivers on them. For instance, the entire structure of the DLC is, like I said, you arrive to House Varun and you arrive when a cataclysm has destroyed half the population. You need to figure out what's going on, and you need to find the missing speaker, which is the person essentially in charge of the entire faction. However, Varun has like different houses that have different sort of ideologies, and you might think that sounds like a really cool concept. There is this power vacuum. Who's going to fill it? How are you going to influence things? So you have to go and meet every one of these houses and do a job for them to kind of bring them together to stop the cataclysm, right?
Here's your leather scraps.
But that's pretty much all it is. You go and you say, hey, can I help you? And they're like, yeah, but you need to go get this thing for me. And then you do it, and then they give you the part you need, and there's no real further interrogation. There are a few choices to make, but for instance, one of the climactic missions, and this is when I just kind of started losing my mind with it, you need to go to a dam. and you need to do something in that dam for one of the houses.
Okay.
So, Scott, you walk out of the base, you go to the dam. The dam is locked. So the game says, well, you need to figure out how to get in here. And there's a kid walking around nearby.
Okay.
So you walk over to them and you say, hey, kid, how am I supposed to get into this dam? And he says, listen, I don't know what to tell you, mister. There's a fella over there who has the key card. Maybe go talk to him, see what he's, if he can help you out. So then you go from the kid, you walk over and you swim over a lake, essentially. You'd go 100 meters, you find another area, you talk to this guy. No combat in between any of this, by the way. Nothing really interesting to do, no real interesting traversal. You go to this other guy and you say, hey, can I get in the dam? And he says, I don't know if I want to help you, mister. So then you get a chance to persuade him or use one of your skills to get him to give you the card.
You kill him and take it.
And then he does. You probably can kill him and take it. But you essentially just press one button on the dialogue screen and he goes, okay, you're right, here's the card. And then doesn't have anything more interesting to say. So essentially, it's like a 3-step process. That isn't
which would have just been opening the door anyway.
That is just opening the door, but there's no combat between any of those elements. Talking to the individuals, they don't have any real lore or sense of personality themselves. And when I finally got to the guy, I thought he might have had something for me if I talked to him after the fact, but it's the same old, same old. It's like, how are you dealing with the cataclysm? What are you up to? Do you like working here? And it was just so... I was just so confused. It felt like padding for the sake of padding. It felt so empty. And I don't think that's what the base game was like. The base game had a lot of empty areas, but its main quests, even if you were just mostly talking to people, they'd have something to offer. But this felt like a 3-step process just to open a door that didn't add anything to the experience other than 5 minutes of runtime. It was a baffling decision, and I still I feel like I'm wrong. I feel like I'm like missing something, that, like some kind of thread or some interesting thing that would have happened along the way, because surely that can't have been the intended path. I don't know.
Well, I want to throw in, because to me, like, the most fascinating part, I really enjoy the base game of Starfield. We both have. We talked about it a lot. There's a spoiler cast out there as well. As I'm pretty sure there is. My mind fails me. We did some podcasts on Starfield. But House for Ruin is this like really cool part of the lore. Like, one of the coolest bits or things you can do in Starfield is go to the museum where you can like read about the history of the lore. You read about how NASA foraged into the stars and then like expanding and what happened to humanity, and then coming across House for Ruin. And if I remember correctly, they worship the idea of this giant like serpent or snake or whatever it is, this interstellar beast, kind of like Jormungandr in God of War, something like that, the way it's described. And they seem to have become this like death cult over time. There's like interstellar death cult. And I was like, that's so effing cool and so metal, and I'm a big fan. And then you meet a character called Andresia, who's like your only sort of access point to that wider conversation. But she doesn't really elaborate on what the Varun are, other than she wants to kind of get away from them and whatever. She's a bit of a crisis of fate kind of character. But all of that stuff was really fascinating. I know the House of Ruin, like you mentioned, is like that's the planet you're going to. You're going to find out about them. Do they do right by any of that mystery, or is it kind of just still put to the side?
No, it could have been any faction, really. Like, they talk about the Great Serpent, they talk about their house's role, why they've kind of banished themselves, what they've been up to, separate from the rest of the settled systems. And that's interesting enough, but it's nothing that you don't know really from the base game. There's no real interesting wrinkles to be added, and that was really disappointing to me, because when you arrive, you're kind of heralded as like this prophet almost, this character that the Great Serpent is speaking through, and you have the option through the dialogue to either play along and like pretend or even fully commit to being like one of these religious fanatics, or kind of call everything dumb and stupid and kind of err on the side of science. And it plays with those ideas, but in the end it's no more than just set dressing. Like, how you interact with people and how you treat their faith doesn't really change the end of the game or the quests or anything like that. And it's just a big missed opportunity all the way through. It does just feel like it feels like a mod in many ways. It feels like the Varun kind of like mod set dressing, the fan pack, whereas I thought Bethesda was going to go so much deeper, at least from a story level. But I come away from it, at least doing the main mission, not really knowing any more about this really interesting faction from that great main game, and it is just a huge shame. Another moment where I just felt deflated, Scott, was actually not a narrative one, but like I said, you're doing missions for all of these different houses, and one is kind of a more militaristic one, right? So you have to go to this command center, and right as soon as you go through the door is an armory, and if you talk to the person behind the desk, they say, look, we don't trust you enough, you don't have access to our goods. So I'm thinking, well, I want access to these goods ASAP. I want some new weapons. I want some new loot. So I do missions for this house. I do missions for another house. Then about 2/3 through the campaign, you finally get access to this armory. And you go to the armory, you talk to the person again, and she says, look, like, this is the best weaponry we have. We don't sell this to the average Joe. This is military grade only. So I'm getting excited. So I'm thinking, finally, I'm going to get a reward for investing into this world. So I get up the wares, and it's just the same old stuff from the base game. It's actually... It's worse than the gear.
It's literally not even reskinned or anything?
It's worse than the gear I already have. Every single one was just called an advanced version of whatever weapon.
That's kind of crazy.
You already have. Like, no interesting skins, not even like a legendary there for me to buy. It was just basic stuff. And not even like the new weapons. It was mostly just, like I said, the stuff you've already got, the shotguns you've already got, the mag pulses you've already got. And I looked through the entire list and just thought, this can't be it. No. I must be being pranked at this moment in time. Like, that to me is the bare minimum of an expansion, to get on that loot grind again, to get something interesting, to be rewarded for the gameplay. But I was looking, it's not like I'm like level 100 in the base game. I'm only level 53. I've got plenty of upgrades still left to get. But literally, I don't even exaggerate when I say every single gun, every single piece of armor that this person had to offer for this time investment was worse than what I already had, and didn't even have an interesting skin that could have swayed me to an underpowered item just because it looked cool. It didn't have that. It was the exact same stuff that you already had experienced before, and I just thought... It made me not trust the game. It made me not. Yeah, Bethesda. It made me not want to explore, because I thought, well, what do you have? Anything? If I go out off the beaten path, it made me not want to pick any locks. It made me not want to look at any kind of computers and dig further into the game, because everything I unlocked, it just wasn't rewarding. And when I got this main quest reward to open an entire arsenal, I just thought, you really have nothing.
I think overall that's a bit of an indictment on where Bethesda's at the minute. I mean, I'm still kind of awaiting like a big old deep dive, whether it's a Jason Schreier, a Bloomberg, a Kotaku, or a Polygon, or whatever it is, a deep dive into the making of Starfield. I know various reports have come out, but I don't feel like we've had a definitive look at the way it all came together. The amount of time it was in development, the reality of the version that got released.
I'm listening.
Make it all work. And it is one of those things where the way that it came out felt like it was still slapped together last minute. Like, Bethesda games, for the most part, are the Homer Simpson car anyway. Like where they believe in what they're doing, but it is just like
good analogy.
Tape, and this thing's a bit rounded, and this thing juts out, and whatever. But we kind of think that overall there's enough charm there, or whatever it is, to keep going. And this feels like the when the bottom falls out of that model, where it's like, no, I can see the gaffer tape, I can see the string, I can see this holding it together. And like I said before, like, my conspiracy theory is just that it was maybe never meant to be this premium DLC, this separate thing in the first place, and just the reality of the way that production went, they ended up slapping a price tag on it. Like, there are things that revealed across the last few years of during the Bethesda acquisition and everything, of Pete Hines just calling out Xbox's general approach to management, and announcing one thing over here that they hadn't been told about, and like the Starfield being exclusive and things like that. And then Pete Hines has left, and it's like, I have to imagine that there were various fires across the last few years that did burn them, and they just kind of went, oh god, okay, I guess this is now this thing. I guess this is now a premium Xbox exclusive DLC, and it's just, I mean, I'm not even that surprised by it at this stage.
See, I am, because I loved it. You know what I mean? I loved the original game. But I know what you mean overall, with Bethesda overall. They are inconsistent, to say the least. But I thought, at the very least, I'd be getting more of a game that I loved. And I think the biggest indictment of the DLC so far is that it's making me question if I really enjoyed the base game as much as I did. It's left such a sour taste in my mouth that I'm thinking, is this far and away different from what I experienced before? Or is this closer to what I experienced before, and time has just been unkind to it?
There's a thing as well to throw in, because I think once you realise that, like, the Bethesda games can fall apart like that. Like, once you kind of realise the way that, say, Skyrim would have repeat dungeons, or Mass Effect 1 had a similar thing where I love Mass Effect 1, but it's quite easy to see the way that they did the galaxy map in terms of the different planets, the repeat biomes, the repeat interiors, and they're pulling from the same tile sets to make those interiors work. You shouldn't care about that stuff, and I didn't care about that stuff first time through. I still personally do not care about that, because I'm so immersed in the story, I'm so immersed in the characters, the world. I'm just getting through it. I'm not sitting picking it apart, going like, well, they reused tile 2 over there. But I think it gets increasingly easy to apply that mentality when they're not convincing you as much. And I think it's, like I said, the bottom falls out. And something like Shattered Space is indicative of when that model falls apart.
100%. I think, you can see the illusion being crafted with Shattered Space, because if you do compare it to something like a Far Harbor, which I don't think is a 10 out of 10 DLC, but has enough to justify its price. Far Harbor as a location, at the very least, was really interesting, right? It had a unique atmosphere. It had interesting points of interest, new characters. It re-established the backstory of one of your core companions for the main game. And when you go to Shattered Space, it looks like it's going to do the same. Like you say, it's this house that you already know about. It makes that great first impression with the city, with this kind of cataclysm, on the horizon that you can always see. But I think the difference is, as soon as you leave that city and you go off the beaten path and you start to explore, you realize, apart from the colors and apart from the skybox, it could be indistinguishable from any other planet that you can go to in the game. And that's such a shame. It doesn't have that unique sense of terrain. It could just be anywhere with a red filter over the top. And that's when I got deflated, because I thought it was all going to be the quality of how that city's put together, all be kind of unique. And then you just again, it kind of feels like a mod in a lot of ways. I'm being distracted by the fact that it's red, which looks beautiful.
Yeah,
but
it should fold into everything else.
Exactly, that should have a knock-on effect. But if you turned off that filter, if you changed the skybox, the thing you're exploring, it's just any other moon, it's any other planet, and that is, I was so deflated by this thing, and it brings me no joy, Scott. No joy whatsoever. And it runs bad as well. It doesn't even run very good. It doesn't even run good. You have the final mission and it chugs along to like 9 frames per second, and it's like,
why can't they do this? How long can a studio be a gaming studio and struggle to hit a frame rate? So just struggle to put a game out that feels like a worthwhile, use of our time.